Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in exploring the book of Proverbs in our BWJ reading this month. We're going through part of King Solomon's treasury of collector's items. I know many of you collect things, magnets and stamps and whatnot, but he collected Proverbs, the wise sayings that he had considered, pondered, sought, and edited some 3,000 years ago. So these are quite antiques. Well, through this collection of Proverbs, Solomon reveals the mind of God in high and lofty matters and in the common, ordinary, down-to-earth, everyday situations. So in short, if we want to know God's will, this is an excellent guide for everyday decisions on how to live our lives well and pleasing to God. As you already know, there are many topics covered in this rich collection of wise sayings, matters pertaining to personal conduct, sexual relations, business, work, wealth, charity, discipline, debt, parenting, character, godliness, etc., etc. Well, see if we can identify or even add some of these topics or more topics in today's reading of Proverbs chapter 15. But before we plunge in, there are two features in Hebrew poetry I'd like to highlight, and it may help us to understand and appreciate the Proverbs better. Unlike English poetry, which is based on words that rhyme, Hebrew poetry features patterns of repetition by parallelism. Two lines or two related sentences. Okay, I think there is some similarity here with Chinese poetry and Proverbs. For instance, the couplets that we often see on the doorposts are symmetrical, right? So two lines, each with a matching number of words. In Chinese, it's usually 4 or 5, 7 Chinese characters. And that produces the rhythm of beats, okay? In this slide, we're talking about Hebrew poetry. The emphasis is not so much on rhythm of beat, but on rhythm of thought, okay? So the two lines provide some kind of balance and clarity. And the three most common forms of parallelism in the Hebrew Proverbs appear in these three connecting words. So you see and, but, for. So if the first word in the second line or the connecting word, the link word, is an and, we call it a synonymous parallelism. And we can expect the same thing said, but repeated in different words. The same idea is conveyed and emphasized. This is what teachers do a lot, right? They say the same things over in different ways, hoping that it will help the student to understand. The second one is but. Okay, it's called antithetic parallelism. And it's when the second line brings out a completely opposite or contrasting idea. It's like demonstrating how to do something and also how not to do something. And in our reading today, we will see many examples of this. In fact, I've arranged the sentences in such, or the verses in such a way that you'll see it, you know, it's right there, how many you can almost count. I think it's about 22 or 3 Proverbs out of the 33 that has this antithetic parallelism. Well, in my workplace here, evidently this is an effective teaching technique. The dance teachers use this technique by demonstrating to the students, first of all, the correct way, and then they also show an incorrect way to execute certain steps. And this really helps the students to see the contrast and understand the difference. And hopefully they choose to practice the correct way. The last one, 4 is called synthetic parallelism, which means that the second line, in the second line, the thought is taken further and the idea is developed and extended. There are other forms of parallelism in Hebrew poetry, as I just want to mention it, but we won't see it today. One is the formal and emblematic, and the other one is emblematic. Emblematic, if you see, the first line is a figure of speech and it illustrates the content of the second line. I think a few days ago, we saw an example of this. Remember the pig with that gold ring on his snout? It is like this. So the pig with the gold ring is an idiom, okay? And then it says it's like a woman, a beautiful woman without discretion. So that's the second line. Okay, so that would be an example of emblematic parallelism. Okay, for today, our proverbs are mostly the first 3 kind. In fact, the second one, the ones with but. And we know that there is a repetitive rhythm in Hebrew poetry, and it's an effective means to communicate wisdom. It makes it easy for people to recite and to remember. And the wise teacher, as Solomon himself is referred to in Ecclesiastes, he has used this gift to communicate wisdom, hence leaving us his finest legacy. Okay, we now turn to reading chapter 15. There are 33 verses in all. The next slide. We will read through them in the New International Version. Many of them are straightforward, self-explanatory, so we won't be stopping at every single verse. But I will attempt to dwell on 2 or 3 topics as we read along. And I've also regrouped some of the recurring subjects to focus our attention on at the end of the reading. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, so Proverbs 15 begins with the subject on anger. We have all experienced this emotion ourselves, and we have come across angry people. It's an emotion that's given to us, and is one of the things that actually we share with God. We talk about God's wrath. But, here's the big but. Because of sin, our anger is often unjust, hurtful, and can be dangerously destructive. From angry children to angry adults, whether they are family members, friends, or total strangers, we encounter them at some time or other. So let us see what we can learn from Proverbs on dealing with angry people, and certainly on how we can control our own anger too. I've invited Uncle Tin Sing to read 5 verses for us and see if you can pick up some of the tips from Proverbs on how to handle anger or angry people. Uncle Tin Sing?
Okay, the Proverbs say, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. The tongue that brings healing is a tree of life, but a deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel.
Thank you. So the first thing we learn, or Proverbs teaches us in verse 1, is that we encounter an angry situation, angry person. The first thing is to answer gently in a soft, calm manner. And how do we do that? We deliberately lower the volume, turn it down. To turn away wrath means to diffuse the intensity of the emotion. So just turn down the volume. The natural way of the flesh is to react to anger with harsh words, stirring up more anger and getting into a shouting match. We will end up making the situation worse, not better. I have some vivid memories of seeing people getting into heated arguments and fights on the streets, and quite often too. But that was many, many years back when I was in China. I don't think it happens so much anymore nowadays. But very often, it started over a relatively small matter, but that got blown out of proportion. So the only way the two heated parties can be separated is when another person, or maybe another one or two people, step in to mediate, and to calmly talk them out of the fight. Those years or those incidences impressed upon me just how important it is to have people who are patient in such situations. Just as it says in verse 18, a patient man calms a quarrel. So be patient in dealing with anger. We know that it's going to take a while for an angry person, angry child, or even ourselves to calm down and to understand, especially if we're in the wrong. With patience, we can diffuse anger. As the angry person lets off steam, so to speak, they may begin to think straight. Okay, so that's the second point. The first one is lower the volume, answer gently. The second one, patient. And what's the next thing? Oh, not yet. We go back to the other verse, to the other slide, the previous slide. Yeah. The next thing is in verse 2, it says, the tongue of the wise adorns knowledge. In some of your versions, it may say commend knowledge or use knowledge rightly. And this means speaking the truth in such a way that makes people want to hear. Don't utter nonsense. In the NIV version here, it says, don't gush folly, gush out folly. It means that we have to listen well and get the facts right and think before we speak. It really does take effort, doesn't it, to be pleasant in our words and tone to an angry person. It's almost easier to just shush up our mouth, which is what I normally do. However, the question is, do I really care enough about the person to want to speak to them in the spirit of Christ? Using the word of God rightly and saying things in such a way that makes them think, wow, that's what I need to hear. Verse 3, it says, the eyes of the Lord is everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. We need to remember, that the Lord is looking, at us in this situation, and He's looking at how we're using that opportunity when we're encountering someone who is angry. We need to, as Uncle Henry quite often like to say, don't waste the opportunity. Is God waiting to see if we are praying and asking Him to help show us how to be a mediator in a situation like this? And the next point is that the tongue also is an instrument that can bring healing because it's a tree of life. Tree of life means you know, it gives life, gives people life. It doesn't crush them, it doesn't crush the spirit. You know, sometimes when we're involved in angry situations, the tendency of the flesh is to justify ourselves. And it's so easy to twist words. And that's what it means, you know, to perverse the word of God. Yeah. Okay, I'm having a bit of a technical problem here. Uncle Henry, can you just stop that recording for a short while? Okay, so yeah, in summary, the 5 tips that we can pick up from Proverbs today in dealing with anger is: answer gently, be patient, adorn knowledge or use knowledge rightly, remember God is watching how we use those opportunities, and giving people life, yeah, not crushing them in the spirit, because in doing so, we crush our own spirit as well. So, okay. Right. What is the next thing? I can't see it on my screen, so I have to look at your screen. Yeah. I have invited. Whose turn is it to read this one? Is it? Is it Naiming? Who have I invited to read
The
this?
screen is
Auntie Ivy, sorry, yeah, thanks.
the screen. Yeah, now can see. Do you want me to read now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. The wise and the fool, the righteous and the wicked. Now, verse 5. A fool spurns his father's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence. The house of the righteous contains great treasure, but the income of the wicked brings them trouble. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, but not so the hearts of fools. The Lord detests the sacrifice of the wicked, but the prayer of the upright pleases him. The Lord detests the way of the wicked, but he loves those who pursue righteousness.
Thank you, Auntie Ivy. Yeah, I only pick up on verse 6 on this screen. This verse that says, the house of the righteous contains great treasure, but the income of the weak brings them trouble. Now we have to remember that Proverbs is descriptive, so it's a general description. Yeah, that in a godly home, not only there's the Lord's blessing of prosperity, but there's also the blessing of His peace, good relationships, more than anything else, the blessing of His own presence there. Okay, so that is the treasure. And we have to remember that this is not a command for us to go running out, chasing after money to get treasure. Okay, thank you. And the next slide, please. Whose turn is it to read? I'm sorry, my computer is down. I can't remember.
Read this, huh?
You just unmute yourself, whoever it is.
Yeah. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path. He who hates correction will die. Death and destruction lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of men? A mocker resents correction. He will not consult the wise. A happy heart makes the face cheerful, but the heartache crushes the spirit.
Thank you. Yeah, I just pick on verse 11, death and destruction. In some of your translations, it may say Sheol and Abaddon, I think, Abaddon. Yeah. It's the same meaning. Basically, we cannot hide any secrets from God. He's the one who sees our heart. Just like, in I think it's in John, Jesus says, I don't need man's testimony. I know man's heart. Okay. And verse 13, a happy heart makes the face cheerful. I think we all know that, right? When we have the joy of the Lord in us, it should show, it should radiate from our face. And even these days, when we are half covered in a mask, we always tell the students, smile through your eyes. Yeah, you can have smiley eyes. Okay, let's move on to the next. Yeah, this one. Whose turn?
My turn.
Thanks.
Verse 14, the discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. All the days of the oppressed are wretched, but the cheerful heart has a continual feast. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred.
Thank you, Fleming. The mouth of fool in verse 14, it says the mouth of fool. I'd like to entitle this, what are we feeding on? We Asians, we love our food, don't we? So this is quite a big subject. So what are we feeding on? The mouth of fool, it says feeds on folly. It means that fools amuse themselves with folly, stupidity, whatever it is, immorality. Okay. But it says here, better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred. What does that mean? What does that mean? We think of all the sumptuous meals and the time we spend preparing them to share with people. Of course, it means a lot to us. But here you have the fattened calf. I'm trying to think back. Yeah, it was in the prodigal son, right? The parable of the prodigal son. Remember when he returned, his father was so joyous that he says, get a fattened calf. We'll have a great big party, a feast. So this is like a rich man's feast, okay? But then here it says, better a meal of veggie. Maybe in the next slide, you see the translation. I like that translation. It says, okay, Henry, can you give us the next slide, please? Yeah, the New Living Translation says, a bowl of veggie with someone you love is better than steak with someone you hate. Well, it's a very strong language, isn't it? We think of the situations where this might arise. Why would you be having a meal with someone you hate? What exactly does it mean? So consider when someone invites you for a meal, could you be ending up going for a piece of Wagyu steak, knowing that you'll be indebted, knowing that you may be owing a favor, knowing that you might be cutting a business deal that maybe is not so, proper. So yeah, consider motive. How often do we look at the motives that is in our heart when we go for meals? Whether it's with people we know or people we hardly know. Think about the motives. Yeah. So I think we'll move on to the next one. May I know whose turn it is to read?
Yeah.
This one.
The way
19
of
to
the
20.
sluggard is locked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Folly delights a man who lacks judgment, but a man of understanding keeps a straight course. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advices they succeed. A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is the timely word.
Thank you. Okay, the way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns. This is a depiction of a slothful or lazy man. In his mind, in his imagination, everything is difficult. You imagine 10,000 problems, and don't work, basically. So you don't move ahead. But laziness is a grievous sin as far as God is concerned. I think it was Charles Spurgeon. Yeah, Charles Spurgeon also preached on spiritual laziness. It's like you're a person who is totally asleep in spiritual matters. So this is something we need to be very careful about. I'd like to go on to verse 22. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advices, they succeed. Well, who do we go to for advice? I mean, here we're talking about important decisions. Do we get godly counsel? I think one of the greatest blessings in our lives is when we can actually think of people, godly people that we can turn to. Recognizing that we're limited in our own understanding of things, and there are people who also have wisdom, and we could also be, we may not know our own mistakes and things like that. So having godly counsel is something that is a tremendous blessing. Not just friends who will tell us things that we like to hear. Yeah. And one of the things about godly counsel, I feel that they check your motive. What is your motive? Very often, maybe we tend to make decisions based on how much we can gain from it, or how convenient it will be, right? But with godly counsel, hopefully all these are sifted out, and they help us recognize what is God's plan, whether we are in alignment or not. Okay, we move on to the next slide. Oh, it could be Uncle Henry, your turn.
Okay, I was going to say, all right, verse 24 to 28. The path of life leads upward for the wise to keep him from going down to the grave. The Lord tears down the proud man's house, but he keeps the widow's boundaries intact. The Lord detests the thoughts of the wicked, but those of the pure are pleasing to him. A greedy man brings trouble to his family, but he who hates bribes will live. The heart of the righteous weighs his answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to, right. A greedy man, verse 27, brings trouble to his family, but he who hates bribes will live. Well, we have plenty of examples of famous, or should I say, not infamous people, right? Who bring trouble not only to their family, but even to a nation. So this is a grievous thing. We shouldn't be dragged into a sort of complacency, thinking, oh, that's the way it is. Certainly, it's not easy to go against the flow, but with God's help, we should. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Sue?
Oh, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. A cheerful look brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to the bones. He who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. The fear of the Lord teaches a man wisdom, and humility comes before honor.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, so again, here we have another sort of a repeat, almost like a repeat in verse 30, yeah, talking about cheerfulness, the look that brings joy to the heart. Recently, I don't know how many of you have followed the Platinum Jubilee of the Queen's 70 years on the throne. And I was just thinking, at her age, 90-something, 96, you look at her and she still has that shine, that twinkle in her eyes. Isn't that just so lovely? The Queen is someone who is known to be very Christian, very forgiving person. Wouldn't it be lovely if we do live to our old age, to never lose that sense of joy, and let it be the joy of the Lord that radiates from our heart. Of course, the good news here, any kind of good news will make us happy, brings cheer. But ultimately, it's the good news of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah. Okay. I think we move on to the last verse. The fear of the Lord teaches a man wisdom, and humility comes before honor. Can you give me the next slide, please? Humility before honor. Yeah. I'd like to leave you this sort of little image here. Humility, before honor is humility. A few days ago, I went to someone's house, and I ended up talking to a domestic helper, and I asked her, "What is humility in Bahasa, in Indonesia and Bahasa Malaysia?" And she brought out both her Bibles and she checked it for me, and in both versions it says merendahkan diri, to lower oneself. And I thought that was just such a lovely description, isn't it? In this picture here, you see, in that sense, one who is lowering himself, knelt. And we are reminded of Jesus. In Philippians, it says, though he was God, yet he humbled himself even unto death. Okay, that is a picture of humility. And we also think of John, who says of Jesus, yeah, at the beginning of the Jesus ministry, and John says, "Behold, yeah, he must increase, Jesus must increase, I must decrease." And I think that is such a nice way of putting merendahkan diri, where you're willing to make room, you're willing to be in the lower rank, let someone else take up the higher role. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But the other thing that this domestic helper said to me, and merendahkan diri, is you receive, you learn and you receive corrections, you receive rebuke in the right spirit. Even criticism, you receive it in the right spirit. And I thought, oh, that is such a wonderful way, you know, in a very practical terms. What is humility? It is actually about receiving correction in the right manner, in the right spirit. So in the next slide, yeah, I have compiled here all the verses. In fact, we've already read through it. I didn't stop just now, but there are 5 verses in chapter 15 alone that talks about correction. 31, it says, we've just read that, right? He who listens to life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. He who heeds correction shows prudence. He who heeds correction gains understanding. But a mocker resents correction. He who hates correction will die. So the question to us, we need to ask ourselves is, how corrigible am I? How teachable am I? How do I take corrections? You know, humility, or the level of humility, corresponds with the level of corrigibility. So I think this is a very good check question for ourselves. Okay, thank you. And we will move on. Yeah, the other thing that I picked up from this chapter that we did today, there are about 6 verses, almost 20% of today's reading is about the Lord. Okay, is about the Lord. What about the Lord? What's his nature like? And we see here, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere. He keeps watch on both the wicked and the good. Okay. Now, I've highlighted in blue the part that I'm just going to focus on for today. If I were to condense all of that, it would read something like this. The Lord tears down the proud man's house. He detests the thoughts, the way, the sacrifice of the wicked, and the Lord is far from the wicked. What does it mean? He detests the sacrifice of the wicked. Do the wicked sacrifice? Well, we think about it. Could it be a situation where if we're not obedient to the Lord, what is that in his eyes? You know, God is saying, don't bring me this stuff. Stop. You know, don't come with your sacrifice into my house as though, you know, everything is okay. Look at your heart. Make sure that it's in the right place with God. We're in the right relationship with God. So the question to ask ourselves is the Lord pleased with my thoughts and my ways? This is something that we need to reflect on. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, again, in the book of Proverbs chapter 15, 6 verses stood out. 6 verses about the power of the tongue and how we can use our speech, our tongue, in the right manner. It says, a gentle answer turns away wrath. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers. And the tongue that brings healing is the tree of life. And what a joy it is to find just the right word for the right occasion. This is the Good News Bible. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly. And the lips of the wise spread knowledge. So we need to ask ourselves, this is a good check. Yeah. Am I pleasing to God? Just now, you know, about it. And I think if we're not sure, I think this is a very good check. What does our speech sound like? Do my words align with my heart, with God's heart? Okay, so very practical things. And finally, I would like to encourage us. We've had so many proverbs. You can share with someone a proverb that you have applied this week. It's a very good, Proverbs I find is a very good conversation starter. You know, you can just say 1 or 2 lines only, or you can even send a little something like this to a friend and say, hey, you know what? This verse, I've had a new understanding or a fresh perspective on it. So it gets the conversation rolling. Yeah, with that, I want to thank you and say God bless you as you share the Proverbs, as you ask the Lord to open up opportunities to be a blessing to someone.